Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this tutorial in which I'll walk you through how to create film-like color grades in FylmAI and use them in Capture One or Photoshop. So let's dive right in. Okay, so here I am in Capture One, and I have a bunch of JPEG and RAW photos in this project. And the process of creating the look in FylmAI is a bit different when working with JPEG files and RAW files. So let's begin with the JPEG files and see how we can create film-like color grades and use them in Capture One. So beginning with the JPEG files, I have my files loaded here. And as you can see right now, I'm in FylmAI Lite. So the methods that I'll be demonstrating now work both in FylmAI Lite and in FylmAI Pro. I will cover one method that works only in FylmAI Pro. We'll get to that later on. And I'll be sure to mention when we switch software so that you know which methods work in FylmAI Lite and which require the Pro plan. So I have my images here loaded in FylmAI Lite. I have the RAW files here at the top, and I have the same JPEG files from Capture One. So with this image uploaded and selected, the very first thing that I need to do is select the input and output transforms. Now, you may not be familiar with this term, but FylmAI is a color managed application, and it uses internally the ACES color management system to color manage your workflow. Specifically, we use the ACES CCT internally. So every image that you load in FylmAI needs to be converted from its original color space into the ACES CCT. All of the color actions or color operators that we have in FylmAI, they work internally in ACES CCT. And then from the ACES CCT color space, it is transformed to the monitor color space so that it can be displayed properly. Without selecting the input and output transforms, you cannot actually work in FylmAI. I mean, technically you can work, but the results that you will get will be very unpredictable. So the very first step that we need to do is to tell FylmAI what this image is. And this being a JPEG image in sRGB color space, that's what we need to select here from the list. So here at the bottom, I have sRGB, and that's what I'm going to select. If this image was Adobe RGB, I would obviously select Adobe RGB. I have some other options which I can use, for example, ProPhoto RGB. And obviously, if you're working with any other input source, perhaps video images coming from a video in log format, then you can select the appropriate log format here. However, if you're a still photographer, you probably don't care about this. So the only three options that should be relevant for you are the Adobe RGB, the sRGB, and the ProPhoto RGB. Obviously, with the vast majority of JPEG images being sRGB. So anyway, in this case, I will select as my input the sRGB. And as soon as I do that, FylmAI automatically selects the sRGB output for me because that's by far the most common monitor out there. But obviously, if you're working with a different monitor, you can change this to suit the characteristics of your monitor. So to summarize this, input needs to match the source of your image, whatever that might be. sRGB, Adobe RGB, or something like that. And the output should match your monitor. So for as long as you're working on the same monitor, your output transform will always be the same, regardless of what the source image is. If you change the monitor and you're working on a monitor with different characteristics, then you would want to change the output color space to something else that matches your monitor. Okay, so from here, I can actually start working and creating the grade for my image. And as you can see on the left, FylmAI tells me add a tool to start editing. So by default, FylmAI does not add any tools for you. Instead, you go to these vertical tabs here, and you can select any one of the tools and apply them to your image. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to use the NeuralFilmAI tool to create our look. We will cover other tools. Specifically, we will cover the subtractive color. We will cover the color density option. And then when we switch over to FilmAI Pro, we will also cover the NeuralToneAI tool. So what's the NeuralFilmAI tool? So NeuralFilmAI tool is a tool built out of 5 different neural network trained AI models, which have been trained to emulate specific film stocks. However, unlike LUTs or presets, which always do one thing, the same thing, regardless of the image that you're working with, NeuralFilmAI analyzes the color information of your image, and based off of that color information, it creates the color grade. And it will make color-aware changes and will not affect some aspects of the image if they already meet whatever NeuralFilmAI thinks is a filmic color or a filmic look. So to simplify this, let's say that your image already has a certain level of saturation. So these specific pixels which have that level of saturation will not be affected, and NeuralFilmAI will not increase the saturation in those pixels or in those parts of the image. So that's the tool in a summary. Okay, so when I click the NeuralFilmAI tool, what it does, it runs my image through a certain analysis, and it offers me these 5 look here's, which are based off of different film stocks. So we have the generic film stock, which is a film stock that you could refer to as sort of the average of different other film stocks that are available. And then we have these 4 film stocks which come from the cinema world, the f-stock 3513, the f-stock 3510, the k-stock 2393, and the k-stock 2395. Now, you shouldn't worry too much about these names or these options, what they're called, how they're called. What you should do is you should basically select the one that works best for your image and start your editing from there. So I will slide this over to the right just to get a better preview. So NeuralFilmAI shows me these thumbnails and shows me how my image is going to look like if I were to apply any one of these. So I very much like the f-stock 3510, and let me now make this a little bit smaller, and let me explain something before I show you the image and the before and after. So if you have a look here at the tool itself, so we have the NeuralAI model that has been selected and applied to our image, but we also have the exposure, contrast, white balance, and tint controls, which are self-explanatory. And also here we have the film softness and grain. So these 2 sliders, what they do, they control actually 4 aspects of the image. The film grain controls the amount of filmic grain that is present in the image. So if I just zoom in here, right, and if I increase this significantly, you can probably, I don't know how YouTube compression handles this, but you can see the filmic grain that we have here. Okay. And the softness offset actually controls 3 parts of the image: the acquaintance, gate weave, and the chromatic aberration. And being so depending on the direction of the slider, using the negative or the positive values will affect where those chromatic aberrations appear in your image. So the direction of the refraction. Now, anyway, I can turn this off and on if I don't want the effect. However, if I'm a still photographer, I might want to use this. So actually, and have this saved in my image. So anyway, let me just collapse this column real quick here, and I will hit the F key to go full screen. And now I will hit the B key, so to show the before and after. Okay, so once again, this is the original image. This is the graded image. And as you can see, it offers a nice film-like color grade. while this image is a nice image, it looks digital as it's been shot on a digital camera, but this definitely transforms it into a film-like image that appears to be shot on film. So let me go out of the full screen. And if I am a still photographer, I might call it a day here. If all I want to do is save my image. So I would go to the Save Image tab, select my format, JPEG, PNG, or TIFF, give my image a name, and hit on Save. And if I don't give it a name, the original name will be used. So that's that. So if I'm a still photographer, that might be everything that I want to do. So I've loaded an image in FylmAI, created the filmmaker grade, and finish off in FylmAI. Now, I just want to show you one small trick before we move on and see how we can actually use this look in Capture One, and then later on, depending on your workflow, perhaps in Photoshop. I just want to save this as a candidate. So by going here and giving it a name, right? I'll just give it a name, number one. It doesn't really matter the name that I give. This allows me, this saves my look, and then it allows me to copy and paste this grade over to other images so that I can examine how it works on other images. So let's say that I want to see how it works with this image. So I'll just load this image. Again, I will select the input and output, and then I can go here to the Apply Grade From option, copy it over to my image, and this is the look. So this is the before, this is the after. The very same grade has been copied over, and I can see how it looks. Now, over time, you might have a certain preference and decide that you better like this model or that model. So when you do the Apply Grade From option, it does what it says. It apply grades from. So the very first grade that we created and saved is copied over to this image without reanalysis of the image. So if we want to make a actually analysis of this image and have NeuralFilmAI analyze this image and apply the look, so we can click on the Regenerate button here, and then it will reanalyze the image and give us the options of what it thinks it should look like. So anyway, these are the options that it gives us in this case. And obviously, we can use any one of these. So that's that. Now, let's see how we can bring over this look that we have created into Capture One and use it there. So let me go back to my image, which I originally graded, so this one. So to bring this look over to Capture One, I will go to the Download a Capture One Style option. The first thing I should take care of is selecting the correct options here. So the platform is the operating system that I'm using. So I'm currently on the Mac, so I will leave this as is. The images I will be working with in Capture One are actually non-RAW, so JPEG images. And when I select that, then the camera make is irrelevant. If I were working with RAW images, I will need to select my camera make. So for example, Sony or Canon or something like that. But again, for the JPEG images, all I have to do is select this option. Again, let's just give it a name 1 and export that. And as soon as I have my Capture One style ready, I'll just go to my Downloads folder. So now I have my zip file here. I'll open it up and I have the co-style and the ICC profile created. So I'll just double click the co-style file here and it will import the style into the styles under custom styles. And here all I have to do is just click on it and it's applied to my image. So this is the graded image. This is the before. And obviously now I can use this grade to copy it over to other images in Capture One like so. or for example, perhaps copy it over to this image and have it examined. So this is the before, this is the after, and that's that. I've created this grid for JPEG image, JPEG images, and obviously I can then use it to apply it to all of the images from my shoot. So let's say that you're a wedding photographer, and obviously you need to grade a large number of images. It doesn't make sense to grade each and every one of them in FylmAI, and that's not what FylmAI has been designed to do. FylmAI actually was designed to allow you to create these looks, what's referred to in the film world as show looks or show LUTs. But anyway, it's designed to allow you to create these looks, and then you can use these looks in whichever software you are working with, regardless if it's Capture One or Lightroom or Photoshop. Again, the process is a little bit different. I will show that in a moment. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that you can simply create that grade this way and use it in Capture One. So this was the process for JPEG images. Now let's see what happens when we're working with raw images actually. So here I have this raw image here, and I want to grade it again using FylmAI and bring the look over from FylmAI. So the process will be very similar, but somewhat different. So it's important to notice the differences. So if I go over here, again, back to FylmAI, and I find this raw file and open it up in FylmAI. Okay, so here I have the raw file. And by the way, when working with raw files, you don't need to select the input and output transforms. That's something that FylmAI will do for you, because we can read that data and reliably select the input for you. By the way, just so that you know, by default, FylmAI reads the built-in JPEG preview from the image. So when you open a raw image that's from a camera that shoots raw, by default, we will show the built-in JPEG preview, and all of these images have actually been shot with a black and white preview style in them. So when you open them in FylmAI, they show the black and white JPEG preview that's built into the raw file. If you want to work with the actual raw data, what you need to do is you need to toggle the develop toggle here, and then the raw data from the file will be debayered, and you will be working with the raw file. Okay, so now let's open up back this file, and I want to show you something real quick. Let me move myself a little bit to the right. Okay, so if you have a look at this image, and then I'll just quickly jump over to Capture One, you can see that this image is slightly brighter, it's more contrasty, and it's more saturated. And that's because FylmAI and Capture One, they read the raw files and they read the raw data slightly differently. Capture One, and by the way, also Adobe Camera Raw, will develop by default your file to the right, so that data is prioritized in the highlights, and so that you get a preview which is closer to the built-in JPEG preview that you get from your camera. FylmAI does that, but to a lesser extent. We have some creative decisions in the reading of the raw file, which we think are better for the color grading process. So we leave some data untouched relatively. So again, if we jump over from here to here, you can see that this image is clearly less saturated, a bit less contrasty, and a bit darker than this image. So now, if we are in FylmAI and we want to grade this image, what we would usually do is, let's say that, let's put the Capture One aside. regardless of this tutorial, let's put it aside, and let's say that we are working with a raw file in fylm.ai. So what we would typically do is we would correct these, right? We first want to bring the image to a nice starting point, and then make any creative decisions. So the very first thing that I would personally do here, I would probably add the saturation tool. I would increase the saturation like so. Then I would probably add the vibrance tool and also do something like this. And then maybe I would do the smart curves, add the smart curve tool and just, pump up the highlights slightly like that. Then I would dial back the exposure. I would dial back the saturation up to a nice starting point. And now if we switch over to Capture One right now you can see that both of these images are a better match. So this now looks very close to the Capture One result. And now here's the thing. In fylm.ai, after we've balanced our image, we would start and make the color grading process. So again, if I am to use the NeuralFilmAI, I would add the NeuralFilmAI at this point. I would select a certain grade, which I think that works fine. I might play with the exposure of it or whatever. And if I go full screen, okay, so this is the original image and this is the graded image in this case. The thing here is that, first of all, if we have a look at the tools which we have added here, so we have first the saturation, we have vibrance, we have curves, and then we have the NeuralFilmAI added. Tools in fylm.ai, by the way, are applied top to bottom. So the first tool that you've added is the first one that's applied to the image. So first saturation, then vibrance, then curves, then NeuralFilmAI. So now if I were to export this look as a Capture One style, I would have this saturation, this vibrance change, and this exposure change, I would have it baked in my image. And since I would have it baked in my image, when I would apply that look in Capture One, I would probably get an image which is too saturated, too vibrant, and a little bit overexposed because the starting point in Capture One was actually from the beginning more saturated and brighter. So I don't want that. So actually the process for creating styles for raw image would be best done if it was done actually on an sRGB JPEG export of the raw file. And let me explain that. But before I do that, I just want to go back to fylm.ai. And one could say something like this. Okay, I know these here, the curves, the vibrance, and the saturation, the vibrance, and the curves, they are actually the correction which I've done to the image. So I'll just turn them off before I export my image and just have this NeuralFilmAI grade included in my export. By all means, that's a possibility. That's something you could do. However, I personally don't like to do that because I'm sort of guessing. So I'm sort of relying on the export and then seeing how the outcome looks and then making any corrections as needed. So I personally don't really like that process or approach. So what I like to do is I actually like to export a JPEG file from Capture One and use that instead of the raw file. So let me show you. Okay, so I have my image here, and if I go to the adjust column here, you can see that this image hasn't been adjusted in any way. Obviously, if this image was shot with incorrect exposure or white balance or something like that, I would probably correct that before exporting the JPEG. But this being a fairly neutral and balanced image, I will just go to the Export tab and export a JPEG file which uses the sRGB color space. Now here I'm exporting a small image. You can use the full size. It doesn't really matter. It is just for the look creation in fylm.ai. So I'll just jump over to fylm.ai I'll import the media. I'll go to the pictures, output, JPEG web. And yeah, this is the JPEG file which I have exported. So I will import that one. Here it is. And if you remember, we exported this as an sRGB image. So we'll just select here sRGB as input, and sRGB is selected as output, which we've already covered. And now I will go to NeuralFilmAI, select the look that I want. So let's just go with, let's just go with the generic film stock. So something like that, okay? So again, let's go full screen. Let's zoom in. Let's see the before and after. Okay, so this is looking nice. The skin tone looks more natural. The greens look more film-like. The saturation here in the reds is deeper. Okay, so I like that. And I will go now to the Capture One. Select macOS as that's my platform. RAW as the image type, because these are the images I'll be working with. And camera make, I will change this from generic to Sony because this image was shot on a Sony camera. Give it a name and export that. And so now I will extract this, double click the co-style, it is imported. And now I will go to the style. And remember, I'm working with a raw file here, and I will just apply this style. And there it is. So this is the grade that we have created in FilmAI, and this is the grade that we get in Capture One. So that's the process of how I would work with raw files in comparison to working with JPEG files. So now I just want to pay attention to something very small. If you pay attention here, the film softness and grain, these two settings have been turned on. However, they will not appear in the style, as these things cannot be contained within the style. Only 3D color changes can be contained within the style that's exported from FilmAI. So if you want to emulate film grain or any other process, this is something that you will have to manually recreate. Okay, and now obviously I can copy this over and paste it and apply it to other images that I have in my project. And now I have this file working, this style working with my raw images. Now, by the way, just so that you understand, it is very important that you select the correct style, type of image when creating the style, because let's just reset that. This image, if I would apply this style to a JPEG image, you can see that it is far too saturated and far too contrasty. So if I have, for example, this will probably show this better. You see, this is too much. So you don't want to use raw files on JPEG images, and also the vice versa. So if you have a raw file and you want to apply a JPEG style, the result that you will get will really be unintended. It will be unexpected results, and again, that's something that you don't want to do. So please pay attention whether you're working with raw files or with JPEG files, and select the options accordingly in FilmAI. Okay, so I showed you how you can create the look in FilmAI and use that in Capture One. Now let's just cover a few more options that you have or that are available in FilmAI, which are quite useful for the creation of more film-like looks. So let me open up this image. Actually, you know what? Let's work with this one. Okay, so again, sRGB. Okay, one of the nicer things about film is that film has this sort of density or this color saturation that you usually don't find in RGB images, in digital images. And the reason for that is that when you shoot film, the colors can either be saturated or they can be bright. They cannot be both. Film cannot have bright colors being saturated. And digital images, they actually do work that way. So when you increase the saturation, you're also increasing the brightness of the pixel. And that's something that you usually don't want to do. So in order to be able to replicate that, what we have here in FylmAI is the subtractive color tool. Now, subtractive color tool emulates the way the printing process of film or prints from film work, where you have, imagine you have this color head, which projects white light through your negative and prints it onto the print film. And then you have these filters, which you add in between. And depending on how much of that filter you add, you are creating different color casts to your image. So if you add more yellow, the image will obviously be more yellow. And if you add less yellow, the image will be bluer, because the opposite of the yellow is the blue. Then we have the magenta, so adding magenta makes the image more magenta, and subtracting magenta makes the image more green, as the green is the opposite of magenta. And then we have the cyan, which obviously increasing cyan makes the image more blue-ish, cyan-ish, green-ish, and reducing that makes it more red, because the opposite of the cyan is the red. Now, if you pay attention closely, when I'm increasing the value of a filter, the image becomes, I'm exaggerating on purpose, the image also becomes darker. And that's because we have between the group head, between the printing head and the filmic paper onto which we are printing the image, we have added a filter. And every filter that we add, it cuts a certain portion of the light, because there's no such thing as a filter that passes 100% of the light that goes through it. So the more filtration that we add, the image becomes darker. And that's how the subtractive color works. So if I were to link these controls together, okay, and then push one of them, it will push all of them by the same amount. You can see that the image becomes darker and darker and darker, okay? It will be very hard for you to notice that the image also becomes more saturated, but it becomes significantly darker. And that's because we're adding more filtrations. Now, let me manually set this to 0.3. And this is probably more than you would usually use, but just for demonstration purposes, I just want to show you what happens when we use subtractive color. Now, from here, in the printing world, if you add more filtration, the less light that reaches your filmic paper onto which you're printing, you need to increase the exposure time. And that's exactly what this slider will do. It will increase the exposure time to bring back the exposure to what it was. So now, as a rule of thumb, whatever the value that is here, if you want to keep the same exposure, you need to have double the value here. So 0.3, you need to have 0.6. And now if I click the before and after, you can see that the image hasn't changed the exposure, but it has become more dense. It has become more vibrant. Now, this is very different to increasing the saturation, and I will show that in a moment with a different image. But I just want you to pay attention to this, that we've gone from this fairly neutral look, we've gone to a neutral look, however, which is more dense. So this is the before, this is the after. This looks significantly better. Now, I will save this as a candidate just so that I can copy it over to other images, just so that you can see the effect that it has. Now, it probably will be too much for some images, perhaps for this one as well. I don't know what the result will be, but I will copy over that look here just so that I can show you what it does. So going full screen, you can see this is the before, this is the after. Pay attention to how much the density here in this sign increases, the density of the color of the jacket, the density of the greens here. So this really allows us to create a neutral look which is much more dense in its appearance than it originally was, and hence make it look more filmic-like. Now, probably in this case, probably I would want to use the HSL tool, then select the red range and just lower the saturation of the reds, perhaps the yellows just a tiny little bit, to bring back the skin tone to a more neutral place. So if I just turn this on and off, you can see the effect that it has on the skin tone, right? So I would probably want to do that. But the idea that I want to show you right now is simply the increase of the density with this subtractive color before we are doing any creative changes to the image. Again, so this is the before, this is the before, this is the after. Please pay attention again to the increase of the density, the exposure, and whatnot happens on here. Now, just before we do creative changes, just to show you how it differs from the saturation. So let me show you on this image. I will copy that over and paste it here. And let's go full screen. And I will do the before and after. So this is a very nice change. I mean, this is not a creative grade. This has just increased the density of the image, and this looks really nice. The skin tone is healthier, all the colors pop, and the image has more 3D feel to it. So it feels more film-like out of the box without making any creative changes to it. Now, what I want to do, I will save this as a match, just so that I can compare it to how the image looks when we actually increase the saturation. So I'll remove this tool from here. I will go to the Matches tab. I will superimpose the density, the subtractive color version of the image over my original image. And now what I'll do, I will go here and I will add the saturation tool, and I will increase the saturation I'm trying to match the skin tone here by a healthy amount. And please pay attention what happens to the hair, right? So the skin tone is more or less the same level of saturation in this saturation version compared to the subtractive color, but please pay attention what happens here to her hair. This has become neon-ish, very, I don't know if that's a word, but it has become a very acidic in its characteristics. This doesn't look natural. Please pay attention what happens to the tattoo here. And the skin tone overall has become more saturated, but it has become brighter, while the subtractive color version hasn't changed in its brightness, and overall the increased saturation, or the appearance of the saturation, is more natural and filmic-like looking. So this just demonstrates that the saturation and the vibrance tool, by the way, they both, since they work in RGB modes, they both don't replicate the subtractive color look correctly, and subtractive color is actually what you would want to do to give your images a starting point that's more film-like. Okay, now let me go back to this image which I used previously, and I used the subtractive color. Now, this has been purely to create a more dense, dense negative. And now what I want to do is I want to create a sort of creative look. But now with these values set up here, this is my starting point. So at this point, I will unlink the controls, make sure that they're not linked. And now what I want to do is I want to change the appearance of the image so that it looks more creative and better to my taste, but use this density as my starting point. So from here, what I see is that my image is a bit too yellow to my taste, so I will want to reduce yellow. So how do I do that? I just grab the yellow slider and I can take it down, right? Now, you can use the slider as is, as I'm using right now, but you can also, if you prefer a more subtle control, you can just click the slider And then you can use the arrows on the keyboard. So if you hit the down arrow key, you can see that the slider changes very slowly, right? So if we have a look here, right? So moving the slider changes this very, very slowly. So while looking at the image, you can just hold the keyboard until you reach the right point that you think works best. But also what you can do is, if you pay attention, we have this dot here. So if you click on this dot, and if you turn it clockwise, it increases the values. And if you turn it counterclockwise, it decreases the value. So you can, again, just by looking at the image, turn this counterclockwise to bring this to a point where you're happy with. Okay, so this looks, in terms of yellow, kind of nice, but this has a little bit more cyan to my taste, so I want to reduce that. So I will reduce the cyan as well, something like that. Then I want to reduce the magenta actually a little bit, just to push a little bit green into this image. Okay, so now I have created an image which is actually more dense, but it is also graded. It has a grade to it. So that's another way that you can create more film-like grades in FylmAI and use the subtractive color as a starting point for better, more film-like color grades. Now, if I save this as a candidate, and let's just give the name number 3, now let's paste it over to this image, for example. Now, obviously, this might not work for every image because, I mean, these specific changes might not work for every image because this image, for example, is significantly colder than the image on which we worked. So now if I copy this over, right, this becomes colder because I have reduced the yellow. So actually, I might want to increase the yellow to make this a little bit warmer. So something like this. Now, this is a bit too green. So let's just add a bit of magenta to balance that. Okay, so now this looks really good. Okay, so this is the starting point. And this is the before. And this is my starting point for further color grading, which has, again, increased the density, increased the saturation, and made this look appear, well, more film-like. So this is the before, and this is the after. So it's a very big difference, while at the same time being subtle. Okay, so now let me go back to this image from which we started, and now I want to show you another tool, which is the NeuralToneAI, and it is available on the FylmAI Pro plan only. It's not part of the FylmAI Lite. So let me switch over to FylmAI Pro, okay? And here is my image. Again, let's select sRGB as the input. And now going to the tools, you can see that we have both NeuralFilmAI and NeuralToneAI. NeuralToneAI is similar to the way it works to NeuralFilmAI. However, in this case, we have 8 AI models. And unlike NeuralFilmAI, which replicates certain film grades, film stocks, NeuralToneAI creates a complete grade for the image, much like a human colorist would. So it will not be just film emulation. It will also be other creative decisions which might be in the image, and which might be needed for the image. And the idea is to create cinematic looks. So when I apply the NeuralToneAI tool, again, it analyzes the image and it gives me these options, which I can use and apply to my image. So let's go with the first one, and I'll go full screen. So as you can see here, NeuralToneAI has decided to significantly make this image darker. And if you think of it for a moment, you usually wouldn't see such a bright scene in film. It would look probably more something like this. But obviously you can change this. And if you change this, you're changing these values both in NeuralToneAI and in NeuralFilmAI. You're changing these non-destructively. So if I increase the exposure, like I don't know, maybe half a step, maybe 3/4 of a step, something like that. Okay, so if I show this is the before, this is the after. So now I have that very same NeuralToneAI look, very same AI look that has been created for me for this image. However, in this case now it is brighter. So by the way, being in full screen, you can use the arrow keys to go down and up between the different looks to see the suggestions that it offers. So this is the first look, this is the second look, this is the third look, fourth, fifth, this one is on the colder side, sixth look, seventh, and eighth look. So I will go to the first look, and again, the process of bringing this over to Capture One is the same. So I'll just go to the download the Capture One style, macOS non-RAW, because this is a JPEG image and I'll be working with the JPEG images. You could, by the way, select here RAW and select your camera make and then try to use that on your RAW images. That's nice. However, there is no guarantee that you will like the result. I mean, it might work just excellent, but again, I don't like doing things where I don't know the outcome or where I don't know the result. So I would work with the data from RAW file if I were to build a look for RAW files. Okay, so macOS non-RAW, give it a name, free, export, again, and then the process is absolutely the same. So I just have to extract the zip, double-click the co-style file, it's imported here. And if I find now this image in here, okay, let me reset that, go to the style and apply the style called 3. And there I have it. So this is the original image. This is the filmic cinematic grade that's been created by the NeuralToneAI tool. And again, obviously, I can copy this over from this image to this image as well. And by the way, the nice thing, and this is very important in this case, the nice thing is that FylmAI will not, when you apply these styles, FylmAI will not change any of these aspects. So you can actually create any changes as necessary in Capture One to your taste. So you can change the exposure, you can change the contrast, whatever is needed so that the image appears to your taste and you're working with the same base look. Okay, so before we wrap up this video, which is already too long, I just want to explain one last thing. When you do commercial photography, your images go through a process, through a certain workflow. Now, this workflow will obviously differ from one photographer to the other, from one area of expertise to the other. But if you are manipulating your images heavily in Photoshop or any other software, or if you're manipulating your images on a pixel level in any way, so changing the values of the pixel, not in terms of color contrast, but rather, let's say, cloning a pixel or removing pixels from image or anything of that sort, it is actually recommended that you don't do your color in Capture One or Lightroom or software like that. Because Capture One or Lightroom, they are the starting point for your workflow. You always start in Capture One, and then usually if you're doing these sorts of manipulation, you finish in Photoshop or you finish in Affinity Photo. If you need to retouch your image, you will finish in Photoshop, because most photographers will not retouch in Capture One unless it's removing something like dust marks from the sensor or stuff like that. If you're doing fashion photography, commercial photography, and you have to retouch the face of your talent, you will do it in Photoshop. Now, the thing that I have learned over my career is that the aspect of the workflow that most clients will have the most to say something of is the color grading. So when you color grade the image, your clients might comment on the color grade and say something, okay, this is too warm, this is too cold, maybe this is too contrasty, maybe this is not contrasty enough. But that's the aspect of the workflow, that's the aspect of the image that most clients, they rather care about and will have something to say about. Obviously, they might not say anything and they might like the color grade that you did in the first place, but they might also say something. The problem with creating a grade in Capture One is that the Capture One is the first step of your image. So now from here, you export this image, you import it into Photoshop, you retouch, and then the client tells you, okay, can we make this colder? Now, obviously, you can work on the finished image and try to make it colder, but sometimes, depending on the color grade, it might not be as easy to revert some of the changes that you did. And in that case, you will be facing a dilemma, or you will be facing a problem where you probably need to start over. And that means retouching the image all over again. And depending on the amount of manipulation that you've done to your image, the amount of things that you do which are not color related, so let's say retouching of the skin, removing this pole from the image, or I don't know what, that might actually be quite a lot of work, and having to do that all over again is a kind of a pain in the ass. So what you should do is you should actually create a nice starting point in Capture One, taking advantage of all the advantages of working with the raw data. You should export that image to Photoshop or Affinity Photo, and then what you should do is you should make your retouching, make your changes, and then apply the color as the very last step. So how do we do that? So again, we have this image, we have this look, which we have created in FylmAI. So what you want to do is you want to create a LUT out of this thing so that it can be applied in Photoshop. We created previously a Capture One style. Now we want to create a LUT. So when exporting a LUT, it is important to make sure that you bake in the ACES input and output transform. So as I mentioned previously at the beginning of this video, FylmAI is a color managed application. It uses ACES color management framework. Every image is converted from the original space to the output space. And since Photoshop doesn't support ACES natively or doesn't work natively in ACES, actually all of these transforms, they all need to be baked in the LUT that you export. So when you apply the LUT, you get what you see here. So we make sure that the bake-in input and output are toggled on. We just give it a name. We export this LUT. And now let me just open up Photoshop. Okay. And in Photoshop, let's open up the image with which we worked. So that would be this one. Okay. So now in Photoshop, you might have a new layer, right? I don't know, a layer, new layer on which you've created some retouching. Then you might have another layer onto which you made some more retouching or something like that. And then at the end of your workflow, what you want to do is you want to add a color lookup, load a 3D LUT, find the LUT that you've just downloaded, and that's the one we've exported. As you can see in the name of the cube file, which is the LUT file, we have input and output set as sRGB, and then we just click open, and there we have it. So the color that we created is the very last step that's applied to our image. So if a client tells us, oh, listen, this is too dark, let's make it brighter, no sweat. You go back to FylmAI, you make this brighter, something like that. You export another LUT, you give it a name, you go back to Photoshop, you don't need to retouch. This is where our retouching happens. You just change the LUT to the new LUT, And there you have it. Your job is done, and you've saved a lot of precious time by not needing to redo your retouching. So that would be all for this tutorial. I definitely hope this helps. And of course, should you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Or if you want, you can contact our support. We are very attentive to your emails and to your requests. So until next time, keep creating cool stuff.